Hey, so welcome back to the shop, friends. If you're new to woodworking, you're probably trying to figure out how you're going to sharpen those new chisels or plane iron. What I'm going to share with you today is a tip to avoid spending hundreds if not thousands of dollars on sharpening supplies. If you're new here, my name is Jim and I'm the creator of the LastingBuild channel. I make weekly videos to help hobby woodworkers better their craft and inspire their minds, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a video. So you've been looking into buying some diamond stones or maybe some power sharpeners, you will know that it's super expensive. I have a set of diamond stones that I purchased a couple years ago, and each one of the stones roughly cost about $100. But to be honest with you, you don't need those diamond stones to get started in woodworking. All you really need is some sandpaper and a piece of granite. So what I have here is just a piece of scrap granite that was given to me for free from a local granite supplier. Then I have a roll of 220 grit sandpaper that has the sticky back, and a roll of 320 grit sandpaper that has a sticky back. You can also get other grits as well, but I think these are the most common grits that you're gonna need in sharpening your chisels and hand planes. Something else that I'll suggest is a piece of leather. Try to get a nice thick piece of leather. This is a leftover from some of the sheaths I made. I tell you what, an old belt makes a really good piece of leather for using as a strop for your chisels and plane irons. So the reason I suggest this method when getting started in woodworking is you can use your budget for better things such as a nice set of chisels or a nice hand plane. You don't need to spend that money on a set of diamond stones right off the bat. You can wait a few years. You can buy a roll of this sandpaper for probably 20 bucks and it's gonna last you for years. I mean, the roll when it's full is this big around. So let me share with you the process here. So what I do is I take my diamond stone and just be sure the surface is really clean. I just use a little bit of glass cleaner and spray it down and wipe it down really good. Because when you stick your paper to it, sometimes it leaves a little bit of residue, and you don't want that sticky residue to cause any undulations in the surface of the granite. So once your granite's nice and clean, just take a small piece of your sandpaper and stick it down to your granite. The granite provides the flat surface, and then the sandpaper provides the grit. I have this weighted roller that I use for my leather craft, and I normally use that to stick it down to the granite. But it's not necessary. You can use your finger or a small piece of wood to do that. So then once you have your sandpaper stuck to your granite, just go ahead and start sharpening your plane iron. So I'm just going to flatten the back of this one a little bit. And as you can see some of the steel is actually already starting to come off on the sandpaper. You need a little bit of lubricant just to help the shavings that's coming off of the steel sort of float away, otherwise it'll coat down your sandpaper pretty bad. And that's the same for the diamond stones as well. Now one suggestion I'll make to you when using this method is don't overuse the sandpaper too long. The longer it's stuck down to the piece of granite, the harder it is to get off. I tell you what I've been doing is I'll pull the sandpaper off the granite, and then I'll take an old chisel and I'll really kind of scrape the granite with that. And that helps sort of release that sticky goo from the granite. So here's about 30 seconds on the granite and sandpaper with my block plane iron. Now before I go on to the next grit, I'm going to go ahead and work on the bevel a little bit as well. That way I don't have to change the sandpaper too many times. Now today I'm really just sort of putting some polish on my block plane because it's already pretty sharp. But you can certainly use this method for even an old iron you're restoring or a new iron that doesn't have a very sharp edge that you need to work on. If you have an old iron that you're restoring and it has a lot of work to be done, what I would suggest doing is getting some 80 grit sandpaper, and if you can, get a longer piece of granite. That way you can take longer strokes. So let's go ahead and take this sandpaper off the granite, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the 320 grit. It came off really easily, and I don't think it's going to leave very much residue behind. So just take your fingers and run across the granite, and I don't really feel anything on there right now. The longer you use the sandpaper, though, the worse it'll be. So now I'm going to go ahead and stick down some of the 320 grit. Spray a little bit of the glass cleaner on there, and then we can go ahead and start flattening the back again. It always amazes me how much material comes off of the irons with just a few seconds really of work on the sandpaper. So let me go ahead and work on the bevel a little bit as well. And I'm just doing this freehand. I have a bevel guide that I use most of the time, but for the sake of today's video, I'm just going to do it freehand. I did it freehand for several years before I made the investment to buy a bevel gauge. And I wouldn't suggest buying a bevel gauge up front because they are pretty expensive, and I think it's a good skill to have to learn to sharpen your irons without using one. So here's the edge after using the 220 grit and 320 grit. And it's going to be hard to see in the video, but I can assure you it's razor sharp. Now you can get as extreme as you would like in terms of the grits of the sandpaper. You can start all the way from like 80 and go up as high as you want. The higher the grit of the sandpaper, the finer or the less material it's going to take off of your iron. And the higher the sandpaper grit, the more polish that you'll create on your irons and your chisels. So the last thing I'm going to do to this iron is I'm going to use my strop to polish it. And for the sake of the video, I'm going to use the strop I already have, but it's the same leather that I showed you before, and it's just glued down to a piece of flat wood. This is just some cheap polishing compound that I use to coat the leather with. I'll put a link in the description to the sandpapers that I use and also the polishing compound. So now I'm going to go ahead and start polishing both the back and the bevel of the iron, just using the leather. And when you glue the leather down to the surface of the wood, put the smooth surface down using some rubber cement, and then the rougher side of the leather will be up. That'll be the surface you use to polish with. Now I glued this down 3 years ago and it has not came off at all. It's fairly difficult to polish the back of the iron. Just do the best you can. Really the purpose of the leather stropping is to help align some of those microscopic fibers of iron. And I definitely try to do both sides. I think it's better practice to do that. But probably the bevel is the main area that the strop helps the most. And when you're pushing on the leather, push down fairly firmly. You really want to feel like that you're driving that leather into the iron. So that only took me probably 5 or 10 minutes to go through the 220 grit, 320 grit, and then strop the iron. So let's take a look at how sharp it is. And this is, you're probably going to spend a lot more time on your irons than I just did, but I can guarantee you this blade or this iron is razor sharp. So I guess the final task is always the razor test, right? So in summary, you don't need a whole bunch of expensive sharpening tools to sharpen your chisels and plane irons. All you need is a few rolls of cheap sandpaper, a piece of granite that you can probably get for free, and maybe an old belt. If this video was helpful to you, I suggest heading over here and watching this woodworking myth video. I'll see you there.